My name is Rona Walensky. I'm one of your hosts for the Mindful Education Summit 2019, which is brought to you by the Awake Network and Mindful. Our guest this session is Dr. Amishi Jha. She is the Director of Contemplative Neuroscience and an Associate Professor at the University of Miami, specializing in attention and mindfulness. And we are delighted to have Dr. Jha with us today. And we've decided that we're going to kick off the question with, what is attention? And why is it important? And what supports it and what degrades it? So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Jha.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be a part of this summit. And to launch right into the question that you asked, attention actually developed because the brain had a very big problem through the course of human evolution, which is that there's far more information out there than the computational limits of the brain would ever allow it to fully process. So the solution that actually evolved over the course of evolution was attention. And what attention allows us to do is select a subset of information from all that's out in the world and actually within our own mind, so that we can more fully process everything that's going on within that selected subset. And it ends up that attention is actually, though that sounds like a straightforward thing, select a subset, it's actually complex and multifaceted. So I thought if it's helpful, I can say a little bit about the specific subsystems and some of the sub-processes regarding attention. And then we can talk a little bit about how it is that attention can become vulnerable and degraded. The first thing I just want to say is that, as you probably all already appreciate, attention is extremely powerful. We need it for every single thing we do. In fact, you need it in order to understand the words I'm saying now, or even direct your gaze to the screen to watch what I'm saying, or watch me and watch what I'm saying. And so to manage this complex and powerful function, we as researchers in the research community of attention and cognitive neuroscience in particular, parse attention into three main subsystems. And I'll give you sort of the technical description of it, but I think it's really helpful to just give metaphors that make this everyday and we can just relate to. So one way we can think about attention is like a flashlight. And just like a flashlight, or in different parts of the world, sometimes it's called a torch. Just like a flashlight, if you're in a darkened room or you're walking down a dark path, wherever it is that flashlight is directed allows you to have privileged access to a subset of information. So you want to see your path, you'll know exactly where to put your foot so that you don't misstep. And that process of privileging a subset of information and actually not worrying about what else is out there is extremely beneficial. Now, we call that system, this flashlight system, the orienting system of the brain. And in addition to being able to orient to the external environment, we can also direct that flashlight internally to our own thoughts and feelings and even sensations that we experience. So it's quite powerful. And what's interesting about this orienting system is that it allows us to select information that may not even be in the current contents of our experience. So if I said to you, what did you have for dinner last night? In some sense, you're going to have to, let me think back. And then you'll bring to mind whatever that was, and it's your attention flashlight directed toward that retrieved memory that allows it to come to conscious access and then report it back, whatever that was. So I think that's a really important way to think about attention, directing and selecting information with this flashlight. But another really important function that the attention system does is more like, I think the metaphor I like to use is like a yellow traffic light. So if you're driving down the road and you see a flashing yellow traffic light, not like a regular yellow light, but just a flashing yellow traffic light, what does that mean to you? Probably it means caution, slow down, be more aware of what's happening in this particular section of the road. And it could be anything from children potentially playing or a school nearby or certain kinds of animals that might be in the area or a strange traffic pattern, whatever it is. It's saying, stay alert. And it's not telling you what to pay attention to. But that yellow flashing light is saying, be ready to deploy attention in any moment it may be necessary so that you can make sure that you avoid hurting an animal that might be running into the street, etc. So that is that system we call the alerting system. And you can see it's quite different than that flashlight, because it's not so much about narrowing and selecting, it's about broadening and being aware and holding a vigilance toward our ability to manage this brain resource of attention. So let me just describe the third system, because that is yet again another way that we use our attention. And the metaphor I like to use here is of a juggler. So just like a juggler who's trying to keep all the balls in the air, this is something we call the brain's executive control system. And we use that term executive just like you would for an organization or a business, for example. The executive system's job is to ensure that our actions and our goals are aligned, or in some sense, keeping all the balls in the air so that none of them drop. And that executive system is unique in that it's not going in and doing each individual job. It's just overseeing, holding the goals in mind and overseeing the action to make sure everything happens as hoped for. And then if, of course, something isn't, we redirect back. So that hopefully gives you a sense of sort of these three main systems, orienting, alerting, and executive control.
That's wonderful and incredibly clear, and takes a lot of disparate pieces of information I thought I knew, and now gives me a much better framework, and I'm sure it's helped others as well. So just to make the immediate connection to learning and education, can you share with us, both maybe from a student point of view and a teacher point of view, how attention is crucial to that, what happens in schools?
Absolutely. And of course, as I said at the outset, we know it's a powerful system, and we know that if students and teachers have access to their full capacity to pay attention, everything's going to go much more smoothly. So in the spirit of describing how students and teachers might use this, maybe it's helpful to say a little bit about, actually for all of us, how these systems can go awry or become problematic, and how those in many cases, in some more extreme cases, can become psychological illness, because that gives us a sense of how it is that a dysfunctional attentional system can actually be problematic for a host of things that we experience. So going back to just that orienting, alerting, and executive control, when we think about the orienting system, this ability to select and direct attention, one thing that we know is under high stress circumstances, and in certain kinds of disorders, that flashlight, that orienting, becomes problematic, so that it is not being held very, very tightly in a controlled way. It kind of wobbles around. Sometimes when it should be pointing to the external environment, it goes internal, or when it should be pointing to the internal content, it goes external. And in some cases, especially for high stress circumstances, it can actually lead to depression, because what happens is that it selectively gets sort of locked into depressogenic or negative thoughts. And so now, instead of being able to freely move around as you would like, that attentional flashlight just keeps getting pointed to certain kind of content. And so part of, as we'll talk about, we want to do is train people, teach people to become aware of where that flashlight is pointing. And then, of course, a better control so it can be aligned and pointed to where we would like it to be pointed to. So one link that's important to make is that sometimes the flashlight can be problematic and sometimes even lead to things like depression. But in the case of the alerting system, the yellow flashing traffic light, that system actually is tied in some cases under demanding or high stress circumstances to not just being alert, aware, and even vigilant, but hypervigilant and hyper aware. And we know that, for example, in disorders like PTSD and anxiety, the entire world is experienced like a flashing yellow light. You just can't see it other than requiring the full scope of your own vigilance. And that can be problematic as well, because in many cases, we don't need to deploy all of our attention to be at the ready. And we can't back off from doing that. I think in the classroom context, again, if there is some anxiety happening or hypervigilance happening in a student or even a teacher, it's going to cause problems because it will deplete the rest of our attentional resources. So now we're expending all of this energy to stay hypervigilant, and there's less available for the flashlight and for the juggler.
And it's also the case that not necessarily the anxiety producing event is from the classroom, but it could be a trauma that's happened outside the classroom.
I think that is a very important thing to keep in mind, is that these propensities for hypervigilance and for anxiety need not have anything to do with the immediate circumstances. If the set point of the attentional system in some sense has been adjusted dysfunctionally in many ways because of other life experiences, it can cause problems in the classroom. And then I just wanted to touch on the third system, this juggler, as it relates to disorders of attention, in particular one that probably most of us are familiar with, attention deficit disorder. What we think happens with ADD is that essentially there's a mismatch between the ability to hold one's goals and monitor if one's actions align. And so what happens is the juggler just keeps dropping the ball. And when you understand that that's what ADD is, it's not necessarily that you can't hold goals or that you can't have actions that align with goals. It's just not consistent. And in some sense, it is imbalanced. So sometimes the goals may be hyper-focused on. Sometimes they may not be held at all. So I think that these disorders, these clinical disorders of depression, anxiety, and ADD give us a sense of the nature of how our attention system is so important for things like emotion regulation and even our ability to be socially appropriate in the classroom context. Does that answer the question?
It does, thank you. And I think the next logical place to go, given the focus of our summit, is how mindfulness can help with anytime there's dysregulation in any one of these domains. And so maybe, and I know that's a big focus of your research. So if you could.
That's right. That's right. So that's actually what got me interested in mindfulness. As somebody whose lab focused on this brain system of attention, I became very curious once we learned that things like stress and threat and poor mood, things that are part of everybody's life experience, that these very human experiences can actually compromise and become, in some sense, kryptonite for attention. I became very curious about how we might be able to offer training to students, teachers, parents, and many other populations for whom attention is such a critical and precious brain resource. And that's how my lab has come to mindfulness training as really one of the only consistent tools we're seeing capable of strengthening attention. And that says a lot. That really says that there are a lot of solutions available out there, but in our hands at least, and in the broader literature, there aren't too many that actually consistently find attentional benefits. So if helpful, I can actually describe one of the foundational exercises that's part of mindfulness training and kind of give you a sense of how it actually is involved in these three brain systems.
That would be terrific.
Okay, wonderful. So let's start with what that practice is, this foundational exercise. And this is sometimes called a focused attention practice, or in other cases called mindfulness of breathing. And it is, I don't think there's any program involving mindfulness that I've ever encountered in which this isn't a part of it. It's sort of the basic push-up for the mind that's part of all of them. And I want to just take that basic practice, describe it, and then really connect the dots on why, as a neuroscientist, I thought it might have anything to do with strengthening the brain's attention systems, as we just reviewed. So let's just first go over what that practice is, and maybe even let's take a few minutes and do the practice just to give you a sense in your own direct experience what it feels like if you've never done it before. So the instruction for a mindfulness of breathing practice is to, and I'll just do it along as I'm describing it, is to sit in a comfortable, upright, alert posture. So we call it sometimes dignified alertness, not too stiff and not too slouchy, just the right amount of attention. And then you can, as you choose, lower or close your eyes. I'm just going to keep mine slightly open. And now for this period of practice, and we'll just do it for a few minutes, the instructions are to just take a few moments and just feel your body sitting in the chair. Feel your back against the back of the chair. And start honing in, directing that flashlight to the sensations of the breath, of breathing. And once you've settled in this way of kind of narrowing your attention to the breath, the specific thing I'd like you to do is pick some prominent sensation in your body that's tied to breathing or the breath. So it could be the coolness of air moving in and out of your nostrils, or your abdomen moving in and out, or just your shoulders moving up and down. Whatever it is for you, I want you to select a sensation tied to breathing. I want you to narrow your attention to that particular sensation. And let's just try to hone in on that for a few minutes. Now, if it hasn't happened already, it certainly will happen. The mind will wander to non-breath related sensations, some other thoughts, feelings, sensations that just might arise. And the instruction in those moments is there's nothing special to do. Essentially, all I'm going to ask you to do is redirect attention back to those breath related sensations. So when the mind wanders, redirect back to the initial focus. Just remember to keep that focus on breath-related sensations and to simply guide the flashlight back when it's off. And in the next moment or two, as we just close this brief mindfulness of breathing exercise, turn your attention back to the screen and open your eyes and return back to my voice as the focus of your attention. So, how was that practice? Did it seem straightforward and familiar to you?
It's one I practice all the time.
Exactly. So maybe let's now just kind of break down how it is that practice may relate to strengthening attention. And I think I, even in the description of it, started incorporating some of the concepts that we talked about. So the first instruction is to sort of make sure that you know that for this point in time, the flashlight, that orienting system, is going to be focused on breath-related sensations. And I ask you to kind of broaden out where first you're just orienting to the fact that you're sitting in a chair and that you're breathing. And then I even encourage a little bit of narrowing. So you're going to hone in on a specific sensation, right? Specific, let's say it's coolness of air moving in and out of the nostrils. So that's engaging this flashlight. And then as we do this for a little while, we notice that mind wandering can occur. Now that noticing function is essentially like driving down the road and noticing through this yellow flashing light that there's things happening. There might be things that I should be kind of holding in my mind so that if I need to deploy my attention to do something specifically, I can do that. So the noticing instruction is really tying into this, what we call salience network of the brain or alerting system of attention. It's just always kind of holding that kind of broad awareness of what's going on in the mind as I am directing my focus. And then the instruction at that point, if you notice that your mind has wandered, was to sort of say, uh-oh, the flashlight's not pointing where it should, bring it on back, right? The redirect. And that ability to know what our goals are and to check in with our action, meaning where our attention is, engages the executive control system as your actions and your goals are aligned. Now, we did the practice for just a few minutes, but if you do this for, let's say, 12 to 15 minutes daily, you start even experiencing in the first person way that, yes, I am engaging all three systems, and maybe I'm even getting a little better at doing so.
And if you add a little kindness in there when you are redirecting your attention, you get even a quadruple benefit from this practice.
I think that is such an important thing. You know, sometimes my dear colleague, Shauna Shapiro, will remind me of that too. She calls it kind attention. It's not just paying attention, but paying kind attention. And I do think that quality of openness and curiosity and friendliness toward our own mind is so necessary. You know, the instruction was not beat yourself up if your mind wanders. It was not be punitive if you're not paying attention. And I want to just say, you know, especially as we talk about the educational context and teachers and students, that, you know, part of the beauty and power of a mindfulness practice is that it is allowing the individual to cultivate him or herself this ability to monitor where the mind is. And that it's actually not all that effective for somebody in the external environment to tell somebody to keep redirecting. In some sense, you're trying to play, I'm just talking about me directly, if I'm a parent, I mean, I am a parent, but if my daughter's not paying attention to what I'm saying, and I might say to her, pay attention. You know, in some sense, I'm giving her a little support to say, come back, direct the flashlight toward me. That will only work so long before these baseline propensities to wander off will kick in. And I think that's really important to keep in mind too, is that we want individuals to cultivate this capacity themselves so that they can check in to see what they should be doing and if they're doing it.
So I want to shift a little bit, but still stay within this realm of schools. I think we all know that parents and educators are deeply concerned about our current generation in K-12 because they've grown up with screen time and with all the distractions and opportunities for engagement and that are part of the current smartphone phenomenon. So can you talk about the challenges of that and any role that mindfulness plays in helping to compensate for that, or whatever seems salient for you in that domain?
Yeah, I think that's a really important topic and very timely, as you said. The first thing I want to just assure everybody is that the invention of the iPhone, iPad, tablet, etc., is not shrinking our attentional capacity. We hear this often, like, oh, our attention spans are declining. Frankly, the invention of these devices has been so short through the course of human evolution that it actually isn't doing anything yet to the way that we function as human beings and our attentional capacity. That's important to know. That means basically our capacities are intact as they were 50, 100, 10,000 years ago. What's different now, and where mindfulness really has a role to play, is how it is that we become engaged and what cues we have to disengage. So if you think about your smartphone, for example, and I'm just going to talk to the adult, so to speak, right now as educators are listening. When you're on your smartphone and you take your smartphone in your hand and you go to some feed, let's say Facebook, for example, and you start scrolling through that feed, you might have decided at the outset, oh, you know what, I want to see what certain family members up to. Let me just go on Facebook and check it out. So you have a clear goal in mind. For the most part, you might. And then you go in and you start looking at your feed. And what ends up happening is that your attention, your flashlight gets directed toward that feed. And it is a scroll. It is unending. There are no opportunities to pause or to actually even evaluate whether you are on track with the goal that you set in mind to look at what a particular family member's up to. In some sense, it absorbs you into that flashlight, just fixating on the screen itself. And I think that becomes problematic because you can waste many minutes where there is no letting up of that full engagement. In fact, what might allow you to actually stop is somebody else says, hey, stop looking at your phone. I'm trying to talk to you, right? There's some other cue. Or something happens in the feed that breaks it up. Like it might even, and Facebook actually is, I don't want to pick on Facebook, but it actually is not that great at doing this. Other programs are starting to become more aware of this. If it breaks your concentrated focus on the stream happening with a request for you to, click on the next page, that's even a powerful moment where if you have to actively do something to break that concentrated focus, you're more likely to wake up in that moment and say, am I actually doing the thing that I should be doing right now? Meaning, did I actually even look at this family member's update and am I done with that? So the power of these devices and of essentially the way that information processing is facilitated right now is really using our attention in every way possible to maximize engagement. And there's two downsides to that. One is it really hyper hyper engages this focus aspect, and it actually disables our ability to stay alert, aware, and notice, so that the executive control system can say, my goals and my behavior are aligning. And the costs of that are that it actually can deplete our attentional capacity. If you stay mindlessly scrolling on your feed and engaging with the content, you actually are fatiguing yourself. So that's one way to think about it. But the other thing you're doing is that you are missing precious opportunities, and we haven't talked about this yet, to allow your mind to wander. And this is a very important operation. So this may be a little bit confusing. Rona, do you mind if I say a little bit more about mind wandering?
Mind wandering is a very important topic.
Right. So I want to just be clear on this. So when I use the term mind wandering, I'm talking about having off-task thoughts during an ongoing task or activity. So I'm going to actually correct what I said a moment ago. Mind wandering is not a good thing, okay? When you're mind wandering, that means there is a task at hand, but your mind has gone somewhere else. That's the sort of downside. It makes our mood worse. In fact, one of the most seminal papers in this was entitled, "A Wandering Mind is an Unhappy Mind." That means this propensity to pull away from what you're trying to do and go somewhere else is problematic for your general feelings, your mood. So mind wandering is a problem in terms of our mood, our performance. We perform worse. We actually start losing the capacity when we mind wander to pick up the information from the environment. It's called perceptual decoupling. It's like the eyes don't see as well, the ears don't hear as well. And you've noticed this, right? If you're actually lost in thought and somebody tries to get your attention, it takes a minute to say, oh, were you calling me? So that's mind wandering. Now, what I just said a minute ago about this endless scroll, an endless feed that you might be fixated on being problematic, is that it actually does a close cousin to mind wandering, what we can just think of as daydreaming. So just like mind wandering, it's having these flow of conscious thought in daydreaming, right? But unlike mind wandering, when we daydream, we're actually consciously and willfully allowing our mind to go anywhere we want it to go. And the kind of technical term that psychologists use for daydreaming is conscious internal reflection. So if we go for a walk, or we're walking our dog, or we're riding, we're in our car somewhere and there's not a lot of traffic, we just let the mind go wherever it will. It ends up that daydreaming or conscious internal reflection is extremely powerful to improve our mood. It's mood boosting. It actually results in insight problem solving, so that we get answers to things that we've just kind of been chewing over in the background of our mind. It also helps us actually have positive visioning and planning in ways that are quite productive. And so what happens when we are on social media, or we're lost in thought with this endless stream of information barraging us in a focused way, is that we lose those moments of spontaneous daydreaming. And with that, we're going to have problems.
So let me see if I can summarize this, because there's
a lot. Yeah.
There's a lot. So we have these attentional capacities, orienting, alerting, and executive. And they're innate to our brain structure. And sometimes there might be some dilemmas for people's brain structures, but one of the ways of strengthening those capacities are the mindfulness practices.
Yes.
And but then besides paying attention in these orienting, alerting, and executive ways, there's another kind of attention, daydreaming, which is creative and enhancing and mood lifting. That is another way we want to spend our mental energy as well. Am I getting it right?
I wouldn't say, I'm so glad you mentioned that. So I wouldn't call daydreaming or conscious internal reflection as a different type of attention. Okay. It's actually loosening the reins on all three systems. It's actually saying we're not going to be this controlled in our processing. We're going to just let the conscious mind go wherever it would like. And that loosening is key, right? So if you're fully just constantly directing your attention, or you're constantly vigilant, or you're constantly making sure that your plans and your actions align, that is never giving the attention system a break, so to speak. So a default approach is just don't do that. Let it go wherever it will. Now, that's not a mindfulness practice. A mindfulness practice is actually directing it in a particular way. I described only one practice out of a whole suite, and there are other practices that actually might strengthen other aspects of attention, and we can talk about that. But what I mean when I say daydreaming is that we are loosening the reins on attention and letting it move around in whatever way, kind of the set points of the mind allow it to go. That is very powerful.
And it speaks to one of the dilemmas in the for the teachers in the education world, which is their lives are often so busy and so full between the obligations of work and the obligations of family and the obligations of just running a life, that there isn't this opportunity for spaciousness that allows for this replenishing that you're talking about. And sometimes we could talk about that as work-life balance, you know, self-care, but there's some way in which we need to find these pauses that are, there is a practice called aimless wandering, which is a mindfulness practice as well. But to have that openness as well as, you know, these other kinds of supports for our mental well-being.
Absolutely. This is absolutely the case. And what I'm suggesting is that our tech-infused life is further consuming our attention in a much more controlled way. And so where the mindfulness practice actually comes in very handy is that it allows us to become more aware of our intention as we step into a particular engagement, whether that's looking at our phone or even what we do when we're standing in line at a grocery store, right? So that if you're essentially impulse at this point is I'll pull out my phone and I'll do something while I'm just standing here waiting. And it could be the grocery store or anywhere else. What you're actually doing is taking away this moment where you could actually do something quite different, which is don't pull out your phone, just be there. Just be in line, feel your feet on the ground, put your hand on the cart, whatever it is, and just allow your mind to observe in a spacious way everything that emerges in that moment. And so I think it's important to allow us to start seeing that it might be important to benefit from mindfulness practice, to know when we should actively loosen the reins on our attention and not miss those moments. Not maybe turn off the radio when you're driving to work, because even that is a concentrated practice. Just let it go where it will. Take your dog for a walk, and don't try to talk to somebody at the same time. Just take the dog for a walk. So this is sort of, there's two things I'm saying here. One is that absolutely attention is vulnerable. And when we need to use it, which is in most things, we want it to be as strong as possible. And mindfulness training can help strengthen it. But the other thing that mindfulness training is so powerfully able to do is grow our sense of awareness of what is happening in a moment-to-moment way. And as we grow our capacity for awareness, we can much better use our attention that is strengthened in a fruitful and self-supportive way. So that's my sort of call to action, is that do less of this kind of endless scrolling and consumption of tech tools when it's not required. Now, for many of us, we can't not have email on when we're at our desk. We need to be responsive. And I want to just make one comment about that aspect of it. But Rona, did you want to say anything else about this point?
I was going to take us to another place, but please make that point, and then I want to talk about the pilot program you have for bringing mindfulness into schools.
Okay, wonderful. So what I did want to say, I've actually, when we talked about phones, tablets, et cetera, and children and in adults, it's this propensity toward hyper-fixation and hyper-engagement of our attention system, and in particular the orienting system, because we're fully consumed. But there's another way in which our 24/7 media and technology consumed world can cause a lot of problems. And it goes back to what happens, and I see students do this all the time, and as a college professor, there's plenty of opportunities to see failures of attention or challenges to attention that are really unnecessary. So for example, if you're trying to write something in a document and you've got your alerts on or your text messages, in fact, you just saw one of mine pop up, gotta disable that. Your text messages or email or news alerts, whatever it is, and all of that is kind of available to you at any moment. What holds the reins for your attention is those inputs. So you may decide, I want to write whatever I need to write in this document. I've got a blank page in front of me. But if there's a ding or a ping, you will orient to that, right? That's the alerting system saying, pay attention to me right now. This is the most important thing. And then we deploy all of our attentional resources to address that input. Sometimes it's a complete waste of time, right? If it's your child that needs to be picked up or something important, obviously you want that available to you. Other times it is completely wasting your time. And what it requires, and sometimes people will kind of compliment themselves. I have students say this all the time. Oh no, I'm a great multitasker. I'm great at doing that. I have no problems. I can write the document, have 50 million things happening at the same time. I just seamlessly do all of them at once. Well, that is just not the way the brain works. This term multitasking is a myth. What we do instead is called task switching. So when you hear that alert go off, that little ping or ding, what you've done is you've had to disengage attention here, reorient it there, engage it again, and then you got to get yourself back. And that takes a lot of mental energy, cognitive energy to do that. And in fact, it's the most costly thing for our attention system to have to task switch, right? It's not multitasking, it's task switching. And if you want to spend out or deplete these precious brain resources, put yourself in a situation where you have to task switch a lot. You know, it's just a bad idea. And most of us, myself included, you'll feel this sense of like blasé fatigue at the end of a day if you put yourself in this position where you're constantly available to the inputs and you put a demand on yourself to do a focused task. So the other piece of kind of advice, I guess, is shut off as many of those inputs as possible and really give yourself the opportunity to do the focused task without spending out this extra cognitive energy.
I really appreciate that. It's a point I often make that we toggle, you know, and I've also read research that says it takes you a very long time to actually bring yourself back to what you left off. You don't just pick it up instantaneously. Whatever train of thought you had, whatever productivity, whatever flow you might have been engaged in has been disrupted, and it will be quite a while before you get back into that.
Right, and those estimates are alarming, right? Up to something like between 15 and 30 minutes.
Right, that's what I thought. Actually, but I'm you know, I don't want to be telling researchers their business, so I'm
right. You know, it's a complex problem because we do feel that we need to be available, but that's what I'm saying. Just like when we can, for example, not look at our phone, there's nothing urgent. Think about that as you are trying to do things. Just try to see if there's ways you can limit your attention. And I do want to make one kind of public service announcement that I think is quite important as it has to do with driving. You know, many times people will say, you know, I can drive with that and also talk on the phone. In fact, if somebody's in my car, I'll drive and talk to them. So what's the difference if I'm talking on the phone? Let me just be crystal clear about this. It's not the same thing. The actuarial data of hands-free versus holding a phone are absolutely the same. The number of accidents that happen are absolutely the same. And it is quite different than having somebody in the car with you. When you're in the car with somebody and talking to them, they share the attentional space with you. If you need to take action, they are also aware and will stop talking, mostly if they're not a screaming person in the back. But they should stop talking if you need to really pay attention, right? On the phone, people have no idea what your current circumstances are. And so I want to make sure that that's clear to everybody. And if you really want to be safe for yourself and everybody on the road, do your best to not use hands-free, and definitely don't text. Stick your phone in the trunk. Just don't do it. Your attentional capacity, no matter how skilled you are, is not capable of doing this, and it will result in a challenge to it. And unfortunately, sometimes those challenges can be deadly. So just don't risk it.
Thank you, as a driver and a passenger. So you have been working on a pilot project in schools. As our last topic, can you share?
Yes. Right. So, you know, one of the things we've learned, most of my work is in the military context. So I'll just say a short few sentences on that. What we learned through this work through the military work is essentially, just as I mentioned, stress, poor mood, and threat compromise attention. And in certain professions, like military service members, first responders, those are part and parcel of what the professional demands are. In fact, we rely on these individuals to go into circumstances that are heightened in all of those. And so we really wanted to figure out how we might offer them mindfulness training in a way that was amenable to them being able to start using it to benefit their own attention. And what happened through that series of, and that's been about 12 years of work where we've been pursuing this, is we've learned that people are open to this. Military service members, military leaders, firefighters, other first responders, even elite athletes, people that are in pressure, high demand circumstances are open to mindfulness training. But like all of us, they don't have a lot of time. So whereas standard programs like mindfulness-based stress reduction or mindfulness-based cognitive therapy can be somewhere between, let's say, 25 and 30 plus hours over 8 weeks, most of these individuals could not spend that amount of time. And so what we've been doing is systematically reducing the time demands and trying to crystallize what the key practices are. And we've gotten it down to a 8-hour program that we've recently learned needs to be delivered over at least 4 weeks. Even if you take that 8 hours and try to squish it into a day or a couple afternoons or a couple of weeks, it's not going to have the benefits that it will in the same way if it's delivered over 4 weeks or 8 weeks, for example. And if you think about it, that does make sense because the brain, like the rest of the body, can't instantaneously change its structure and function. Nobody would ever dare to think you can train for a marathon in a weekend, right? We know we need to allow our bodies to restructure and strengthen. Same thing with the mind. So this program called Mindfulness-Based Attention Training that we developed for the military and found is quite beneficial, not only for special operations forces and firefighters, but conventional military forces. We started thinking, these are not the only folks that are time pressured. And another group of individuals who actually have incessant demands on them are teachers. And so what if we could actually transform this training, recontextualize it for sort of the battlefield of life, so to speak. And so, for example, just to give you a little taste of how we recontextualized it, whereas we might have a theme called shoot, don't shoot for the military service member, where you're trying to make sure you have appropriate action and you're not reactively engaging with whatever you do, we would change that to the same lesson, but shout, don't shout for the teacher, so that you also are not inappropriately or reactively responding, right? You are actually responding instead of reacting in some sense. So we devised a program collaborating with teachers called Mindfulness-Based Attention Training for Teachers. And what we've done now is trained 2 wonderful teachers at a local school who have been delivering it to other teachers. And in the first pilot study that we did, we actually found, we actually took functional MRI measures as well as, so brain measures as well as performance measures and self-report measures to see how things like burnout, anxiety, effectiveness in the teachers was rated. And they were beneficial with as little as 8 hours of training over 4 weeks. And so what this allows us is it gives us a window into a scalable model. If we go into a school and we train a subset of teachers, they might be able to guide other teachers and continue to sort of pay it forward or pass it along.
It's very exciting. Program I work with is a 20-hour program, and we've in fact tried to create, we have created an 8-hour program.
Excellent.
Same theory that very few people can commit to such a long program. So that's an exciting development. Do you have a sense of when something like that will be available more widely to people?
That's the big question.
Researchers are slower, it's a slow go out of the gate.
Well, right now we are happy to work with other schools that might be interested in getting a subset of their teachers or even administrators trained up to deliver it. Our interest is not in going out and delivering it to them directly, because one thing, this is actually quite an important point. We're not the content experts, or the context experts, I should say. We don't know. I'm not a school teacher. I'm not a school administrator. But if we have a very short amount of time, having somebody that embodies that context expertise delivering it makes the whole thing much richer and actually allows people to feel empowered to solve problems themselves, and apply these practices in the best way. So that is our interest, to actually engage with other schools, and we've been approached by many to do that. One last point that kind of ties all these things together is that it ends up that teachers and students are quite vulnerable to attentional degradation over the course of the academic semester. And by the way, the same pattern of over, let's say, an 8 to 9 week interval, people declining in their attentional capacity, we've seen in groups like pre-deployment soldiers. We've seen in groups of people that are athletes preparing for a training season. And we've seen in undergraduates over the course of an academic semester. So it is the case, and we feel it, but we can actually track it with our measures, that attention is more vulnerable over the semester. And in those that participate in our training, we're able to protect against that. So that while people that don't get our training may decline in attentional capacity, those that get the training actually stay steady. And that can have profound benefits for not only the teachers that are actually trying to teach, but the students who at the end of the semester often have to take the big exam that determines their grade. So they're not quite as depleted, and they can actually continue to learn better throughout the course of the academic semester and academic year.
So are you working with, are the teachers bringing practices as well to the students?
Right. So, my work is specifically with adults. There are so many wonderful programs that have instantiated that into classroom delivery to students. And I would just say you have many experts in the summit that are going to offer you what that looks like. Our interest in our work was really to see how we would empower and strengthen attentional capacity and protect against burnout in teachers.
Dr. Jha, thank you so much. This has been an incredibly rich conversation with many things for people to take away and use. I so appreciate your time.
Thank you very much.